Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we're diving deep into one of those moments that just sends chills down your spine, the Boston Massacre.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's one of those events that's really stayed with us in American history. I mean, who hasn't heard of the Boston Massacre, but how many of us really know what happened?
Right. That's what we're here for today. So to guide our deep dive, we're turning to an episode of the History That Doesn't Suck podcast. They really go into the nitty-gritty of this event and how it shaped the course of American history. But before we jump into the chaos of that night, let's set the stage. What was life like in Boston in 1770 under British occupation?
Well, imagine living in a city occupied by a foreign power. Troops constantly patrolling your streets, enforcing laws you see as completely unjust. That was the reality for Bostonians. The 7 Years' War had just ended in 1763, and, it left Britain in a pretty tough spot financially.
Yeah, war is expensive.
Oh, absolutely. So to recover some of those costs, they started imposing a whole bunch of taxes on the American colonies.
And that didn't go over so well, did it?
Not at all. The colonists felt like they were being taxed without any say in the matter. No representation in Parliament. It was like taxation without representation, which they saw as a direct attack on their liberties.
I can see why they'd be upset. I mean, it's like being told you have to pay for a party you weren't even invited to.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, the History That Doesn't Suck podcast highlights these things called the Townsend Acts of 1767. They placed taxes on everyday items like tea glass, paper, essential goods.
So basically everything got more expensive overnight.
Pretty much. And it wasn't just about the money either. It was about the principle. The colonists saw it as Britain tightening its control over their lives. And Boston, being Boston, known for its rebellious spirit, well, it became a hotbed of resistance.
And of course, the British responded by sending in even more troops in 1768, like pouring gasoline on a fire.
Oh, yeah, it definitely escalated things. Imagine soldiers armed to the teeth marching through your streets, a constant reminder of British authority. Clashes between soldiers and colonists became more and more frequent.
The podcast actually mentions a really interesting incident with John Hancock. The founding father with that iconic signature. He had a run-in with British authorities even before the massacre.
Hancock was a wealthy merchant, and, well, let's just say he wasn't always a fan of paying taxes. There was this incident where customs officials boarded his ship, the Lydia, looking for contraband. But Hancock, he didn't back down. He basically stared them down, intimidated them into leaving empty-handed.
He sounds like a total badass.
Oh, he was. And this incident, it really cemented his reputation as a defender of colonial rights. But then things escalated even further with the Liberty.
Ah, yes, the Liberty incident.
Yeah.
This is where things really heat up. Tell us about that.
So customs officials, they seized the Liberty Hancock ship. They suspected him of smuggling Madeira wine, basically under-declaring his cargo to avoid paying taxes.
Ah, classic smuggling.
Well, it sparked outrage in Boston. A mob formed. They started harassing the customs officials, even dragged the collector's boat through town and burned it in protest.
That's a pretty clear message.
Oh, yeah. The British responded by sending even more troops to Boston. It was like they were on a collision course. And it all came to a head on the night of March 5th, 1770, the night of the Boston Massacre.
Okay, so let's finally dive into that fateful night. What actually happened during the Boston Massacre?
Well, that's where things get really interesting because there are two very different versions of what went down that night, two very distinct narratives. You've got the Patriot version, the one that paints the British soldiers as the bad guys. They say it was a group of innocent colonists just throwing some snowballs at these soldiers who totally overreacted with a deadly force.
Yeah, it's like that classic David and Goliath story, right? The little guy standing up to the big bad empire.
Exactly. And they really use this powerful language, to make you feel for the victims. They talk about the soldiers, these menacing bayonets, their loud commands, the sound of gunshots in the dark. It's chilling.
Oh, yeah, I bet. And they don't shy away from the details either, like that poor young Samuel Gray who was shot in the head. Part of his skull was ripped off.
Yeah.
And that's just horrific.
It's a brutal image, for sure. But then you have the loyalist version, and they paint a completely different picture.
Okay, so in their version, the colonists are the aggressors.
Yeah. They say the colonists weren't just tossing harmless snowballs. They were throwing chunks of ice rocks, even sticks, yelling insults, threatening the soldiers, daring them to fire.
So they were really pushing it, huh?
According to the loyalists, yeah. They paint Captain Preston as this, level-headed leader, trying to calm everyone down, standing between his men and this angry mob. They say the soldiers only fired because they were genuinely afraid for their lives.
Wow. So we got two totally different stories here. It's amazing how the same event can be interpreted in such drastically different ways.
That's the thing about history, right? We have to be careful not to just take things at face value. We have to look at the evidence Consider the biases of those who recorded it. Eyewitness accounts can be unreliable too,
Oh.
colored by fear, emotion, all sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like the truth of what happened that night is still up for debate even today.
Definitely. And the History That Doesn't Suck podcast really drives that point home. They emphasize that we have to be wary of simple narratives, this idea of neatly dividing history into good guys and bad guys. It's usually a lot more complicated than that.
Right. It's not always black and white. There are a lot of gray areas.
Exactly. And embracing that complexity is key to understanding history. So even though the truth of that night might be murky, the impact of the Boston Massacre was undeniable. It became this rallying cry for the patriot cause, this symbol of British oppression.
Right. It really fueled the flames of the revolution. But before we get to that, let's talk about what happened after the massacre. What about the soldiers? They were put on trial, right?
Yeah, the trial of Captain Preston and his soldiers was a huge deal in Boston. It was this legal drama that had everyone on the edge of their seats. And the stakes were high. I mean, this case could have pushed the colonies closer to war.
And what's interesting is that John Adams, a staunch supporter of colonial rights, he actually agreed to defend the soldiers. That seems kind of surprising, doesn't it?
It does, but it really shows his commitment to the idea of a fair trial. He believed that everyone deserves a strong defense, regardless of what they're accused of.
That's pretty impressive, especially in such a politically charged environment.
Yeah.
So what happened at the trial?
It was basically a battle of narratives. You had the Patriot version versus the Loyalist version. John Adams, he really went all out arguing that the soldiers acted in self-defense. He painted this picture of total chaos, a mob that was out of control, soldiers who were terrified for their lives.
But the prosecution, they must have presented a pretty compelling case too, right? I mean, a bunch of kids throwing snowballs doesn't exactly scream dangerous mob.
Oh, they did their best. They focused on the victims, the loss of life. They talked about young Samuel Gray with that terrible head wound and Samuel Maverick, just 17 years old when he was killed. They really appealed to the jury's emotions, trying to make them feel the weight of what had happened.
Man, it must have been intense.
Oh.
So what was the verdict?
After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury acquitted 6 of the 8 soldiers.
Right. So most of them just walked free?
Yep. And Captain Preston, he was also acquitted in a separate trial.
Wow, that's surprising.
It is. The remaining 2 soldiers, Matthew Kilroy and Hugh Montgomery, they were found guilty of manslaughter. But even then, they got off pretty easy. They were branded on their thumbs and then released.
Branded on their thumbs? Wow, that's wild. That doesn't seem like much of a punishment considering, people died.
I know, it seems strange to us now, but back then, the law was different. The concept of self-defense was viewed differently. And there was this thing called benefit of clergy, which basically let first-time offenders avoid the death penalty for certain crimes. So that might have played a role in the lighter sentences.
It sounds like the legal aspects of this case are almost as fascinating as the event itself.
Oh, definitely. And the trial had huge implications, even beyond the actual verdict.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Those acquittals, they really added fuel to the fire for the colonists. It felt like the British government just didn't care about their concerns, like their lives didn't matter. It's like a slap in the face almost.
Yeah.
Like their grievances weren't being taken seriously.
Exactly. And that's how the Boston Massacre became this symbol of British tyranny, is used by the Patriots to rally support for independence.
Right. And speaking of symbols, we can't forget about Paul Revere's engraving of the massacre.
Yeah.
It became so iconic.
Oh, absolutely. It was propaganda, for sure, but incredibly effective propaganda. It really shaped how people saw the event.
For those who haven't seen it, can you describe the engraving?
Well, it shows these British soldiers lined up in formation, firing directly into a crowd of unarmed colonists. There's no hint of chaos or provocation from the colonists. It's very deliberate, very powerful. It's designed to make you angry, make you sympathize with the victims.
It's a good reminder of how images can be so influential in shaping public opinion. And we see that even today with social media and everything.
Oh, for sure. A picture can be worth 1,000 words. And in the case of the Boston Massacre, it helped to galvanize the colonies against British rule.
It became a rallying cry, a symbol of everything they were fighting against.
Exactly. And before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier about Christmas Addicts, the African-American man who was killed during the massacre. His story has really resonated throughout history.
Yeah, it goes beyond the immediate context of the event. It speaks to something larger.
Right. Christmas Addict's death became really important for abolitionists and civil rights activists later on. It showed that the fight for freedom and equality, it wasn't just for white colonists, it's for all Americans.
It's a reminder that history is full of these interconnected stories. Stories of struggle and resilience and the pursuit of justice.
Absolutely. It's about the human experience. It's not just dates and battles. It's about real people and their lives.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Boston Massacre, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. We have to be critical thinkers when it comes to history, especially when we're dealing with events that have these conflicting accounts. We have to question everything, look for biases, consider different perspectives. That's more important now than ever with all the information and misinformation out there.
It's so easy to just passively accept the stories we're told. But we have to dig deeper, ask questions, challenge the narratives.
Yeah.
That's how we get closer to the truth. And that's what we've tried to do today with this deep dive into the Boston Massacre.
Exactly. And for our listeners, I encourage you to keep exploring. Read those primary sources, the eyewitness accounts, letters, pamphlets. There's so much more to uncover.
There's always more to learn.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of history. Well, thanks for joining us on this journey back in time to the Boston Massacre. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.